Excuse me, sir, but I'm going to need you to move. This seat has been reassigned to our Diamond Elite member. The words sliced through the hushed ambiance of first class like a blade through silk. Victoria Nash stood in the aisle of Skyline Airways Flight 447, her crisp navy uniform impeccable, her smile as cold as the Miami evening rain drumming against the aircraft windows. She wasn't asking. She was commanding. Jerome Hamilton looked up from his leather briefcase, his dark eyes meeting hers with calm curiosity. At 45, Jerome carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing. His Brioni Navy suit was understated but unmistakably expensive to anyone who knew quality when they saw it. The Patek Philippe Nautilus on his wrist caught the cabin's ambient lighting as he closed the contract folder he'd been reviewing. "I'm sorry. There must be some confusion," Jerome said, his voice a smooth baritone that carried the authority of boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. "This is my assigned seat, 1A. He gestured to the boarding pass resting on his tray table, the first-class designation clearly visible. Victoria's eyes flicked over the boarding pass without really seeing it. What she saw was a black man in what she considered prime real estate. Her 12 years as a flight attendant had taught her to read passengers quickly, and in her mind, Jerome didn't fit the profile of someone who belonged in seat 1A. "Sir, I understand your confusion, but we've had a last-minute reassignment due to our loyalty program protocols. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable in business class. We can offer you a voucher for the inconvenience." The cabin had gone quiet. Other first-class passengers, sensing tension, looked up from their phones and magazines. A young woman in 2C, Rachel Turner, a social media manager from Atlanta, felt her fingers instinctively reach for her phone. Something about this interaction felt wrong, felt familiar in the worst possible way. Jerome didn't move. He'd paid $8,400 for this seat, not because he needed the leg room or the champagne service, but because he needed the privacy. The briefcase beside him contained documents that could change the landscape of freight shipping on the East Coast. Hamilton Global Freight, his company, had just secured the largest logistics contract in its 15-year history. The partnership with Skyline Airways alone was worth $120 million over 3 years. He had built Hamilton Global from a single delivery truck into one of the largest freight companies in the Southeast. His warehouses stretched from Miami to Norfolk. His cargo planes carried everything from pharmaceuticals to automotive parts across the Atlantic. And now, after 2 days of intense negotiations in Miami's financial district, he just wanted to go home to his family in New York. "I'll need to see some identification and verification of this reassignment," Jerome said calmly, pulling out his phone. "I'm sure this can be resolved quickly." Victoria's jaw tightened. In her experience, passengers who pushed back were usually trying to scam their way into upgrades. She'd seen it countless times, people with fake boarding passes or using expired vouchers trying to talk their way into premium seats they couldn't afford. "Sir, I don't need to show you anything. I am the lead purser on this aircraft, and passenger seating is under my discretion according to federal aviation regulations." That's when the cabin door opened with a pneumatic hiss and Bradford Mitchell stepped through. Bradford was everything Jerome was not in Victoria's narrow worldview. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere coat that screamed old money, he moved with the practiced entitlement of someone who'd never been told no in 52 years. His family's real estate empire had been built on 3 generations of connections, handshake deals, and the kind of institutional privilege that opened doors before you even knocked. Brenda Darling Bradford called out, mistaking Victoria's name but not caring enough to get it right. "There seems to be someone in my usual spot." Victoria's demeanor changed instantly. The professional mask slipped away, replaced by the warm, accommodating smile she reserved for passengers she deemed worthy. "Mr. Mitchell. So wonderful to see you again. Yes, we're just handling a small seating issue. Nothing that can't be resolved quickly." Jerome watched this transformation with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent his career reading people and situations. He understood immediately what was happening. This wasn't about airline policy or seat assignments. This was about assumptions, biases, and the kind of casual discrimination that happened so smoothly it felt like choreography. "I see the problem," Bradford said, looking at Jerome with the same expression he might use to examine an unwanted piece of furniture. Surely this gentleman would be more comfortable in economy. "I'm sure he didn't actually pay for first class." The words hung in the recycled air like a slap. Several passengers gasped audibly. Rachel Turner's hand tightened around her phone and she began recording. Jerome felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with moments like these. He'd experienced them in boardrooms, at business dinners, in hotel lobbies, and now apparently at 35,000 feet. The assumption that success, wealth, and belonging had a particular color. Actually, Jerome said, his voice remaining level despite the anger building in his chest, "I paid full fare for this seat, and I'd like to know on what authority you're asking me to move." Victoria stepped closer, invading his personal space in a way that was both unprofessional and intimidating. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to gather your belongings and move to your reassigned seat in business class. If you continue to be non-compliant with crew instructions, I'll have to involve airport security." The threat of security, Jerome knew, was the nuclear option. In the post-9/11 world, non-compliance with crew instructions could lead to federal charges, no-fly lists, and public humiliation that followed you forever. It was a threat designed to make passengers fold to accept injustice rather than fight it. But Jerome Hamilton hadn't built a $200 million company by folding when threatened. From her jump seat near the galley, Elena Rodriguez watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. At 29, she'd been flying for Skyline for 3 years, and she'd seen Victoria handle difficult passengers before. But something about this felt different, felt darker. She pulled up the passenger manifest on her tablet and scrolled to seat 1A. Jerome Hamilton. The name meant nothing to her, but the fare class was clear, fully paid first-class ticket purchased 48 hours ago. No upgrades, no vouchers, no miles redemption. Cash transaction for $8,400. Elena stood up and approached Victoria. "Victoria, I'm showing his ticket as valid in the system. Seat 1. A full fare confirmed reservation." Victoria whipped around her professional facade, cracking. "Elena, I need you to handle the galley prep. I'll manage passenger services. But the system clearly shows the galley Elena. Now." Elena stepped back, but she didn't retreat to the galley. Instead, she opened the crew incident reporting system on her tablet and began typing. Time 1947. 19. Incident potential discrimination in passenger treatment. Lead purser questioning valid first-class passenger without justification. Jerome watched this exchange and felt a flicker of hope. At least one crew member was paying attention to facts rather than assumptions. Bradford settled into seat 1B, spreading his belongings across the space as if marking territory. "You know, Brenda, I've been flying this route twice a month for 8 years. Never had this kind of situation before." The pause before situation carried enough venom to poison the entire cabin. Jerome made a decision. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to a contact simply labeled David. "Emergency." The message was brief. "It's happening again. Flight 447. Prepare Protocol 7, 500 miles away in Hamilton Global's headquarters in Charlotte." David Park's phone buzzed. Jerome's executive assistant read the message and felt his stomach drop. Protocol 7 was something they'd hoped never to use. Back on the plane, Victoria was losing patience. "Sir, this is your final warning. Move to business class or I will call security." Jerome looked around the cabin. Rachel Turner was openly filming now. The elderly couple in 3C and 3D were whispering urgently to each other, occasionally glancing his way with sympathetic expressions. A businessman in 2B had started his own live stream, whispering into his phone, This is happening right now on Skyline Airways Flight 447. They're trying to remove a paying passenger from first class. Jerome stood slowly gathering his briefcase and carry-on bag. He looked Victoria directly in the eye and spoke clearly enough for the entire cabin to hear. You're making a mistake. A very expensive mistake. I suggest you document this incident carefully because you're going to need to explain it to people much higher up the chain than you can imagine. Victoria smiled coldly. Is that a threat, sir? No, Jerome said, walking toward the aircraft door. It's a promise. As Jerome Hamilton walked down the jet bridge with his head held high, his phone was already buzzing with activity. Behind him, Bradford Mitchell settled into seat 1A with the satisfaction of a man who'd never doubted his own entitlement. Much better, Bradford announced to no one in particular, flagging down Elena Rodriguez. Champagne, please, and make sure it's the Dom Perignon, none of that cheap stuff you usually serve. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she poured the champagne. She'd grown up in East L.A., the daughter of immigrants who'd cleaned offices in downtown skyscrapers. She knew the difference between earned confidence and inherited arrogance, and Bradford Mitchell reeked of the latter. Will there be anything else, Mr. Mitchell? She asked, her voice professionally neutral, despite the disgust churning in her stomach. Just make sure we don't have any more interruptions, Bradford replied, already pulling out his laptop as if the entire incident had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Victoria Nash moved through the cabin with renewed authority, checking on other first-class passengers, accepting their subtle nods of approval. In her mind, she'd handled a difficult situation efficiently. She'd maintained order, protected the airline's most valuable customers, and demonstrated decisive leadership. She had no idea she'd just lit the fuse on a bomb that would explode in her face within hours. Rachel Turner uploaded her video to TikTok with shaking hands. The caption was simple but powerful. Black passenger removed from first class to make room for white passenger. At Skyline Airways, this is not okay. Hashtag Skyline. Shame. Hashtag first class discrimination. Within minutes, the video had 50 views. Within an hour, it would have 50,000. Meanwhile, in the business class cabin, Jerome had been assigned seat 7A, a window seat that under normal circumstances would have been perfectly comfortable. But these weren't normal circumstances. As he settled into the narrower seat, Jerome opened his laptop and connected to the aircraft's Wi-Fi. His first call was to David Park. David, are you seeing the social feeds already monitoring Jerome? Rachel Turner, social media manager from Atlanta. Her video is gaining traction fast. The hashtag Skyline Shame hashtag is starting to trend regionally. Jerome nodded grimly. What's the status on our contracts? All Hamilton global operations with Skyline Airways are under your direct authority. The freight contracts, the logistics partnerships, the cargo plane leases. Everything runs through your executive approval. And the renewal negotiations scheduled for Monday morning. $120 million over 3 years, plus the international expansion clause. They're expecting your signature. Jerome was quiet for a long moment. Through the aircraft window, he could see the Miami skyline twinkling in the distance as Flight 447 taxied toward the runway. David, I want you to call an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Legal PR operations, everyone. Jerome, are you sure you want to escalate this? Maybe we should try to handle it quietly first. Quietly, Jerome's voice carried a bitter edge. David, I was just humiliated in front of a cabin full of passengers because a flight attendant decided I didn't look like I belonged in a seat I paid $8,000 for. How exactly do we handle that quietly? David Park had worked for Jerome for 7 years. He'd seen his boss negotiate with Fortune 500 CEOs, handle hostile takeovers, and navigate international trade disputes. He'd never heard this particular tone in Jerome's voice, a combination of controlled fury and ice-cold calculation. Protocol 7, David asked. Protocol 7, Back in first class, Captain Michael Torres emerged from the cockpit for his standard pre-flight cabin walk. At 48, Torres had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years. He'd seen passenger disputes, medical emergencies, and every kind of human drama imaginable at altitude. What he saw in the first-class cabin made him pause. Victoria Nash was checking overhead bins with military precision, but there was a tension in her movements that suggested recent stress. Bradford Mitchell was typing aggressively on his laptop, occasionally muttering what sounded like complaints. Elena Rodriguez was preparing the galley with the kind of focused intensity that usually indicated suppressed emotion. "Everything all right back here?" Torres asked Victoria. "Just a minor seating issue, Captain. Resolved without incident." Torres had heard that phrase before, usually when incidents were anything but resolved. What kind of seating issue passenger was trying to occupy a seat that needed to be reassigned for a Diamond Elite member? Standard protocol. Something in Victoria's tone didn't sit right with Torres. He'd been flying long enough to know when crew members were covering something up. "Show me the passenger manifest and the reassignment authorization." Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Captain, I handled it according to procedure. The passenger was moved to business class with appropriate compensation offered." "I didn't ask about compensation. I asked to see the authorization for the reassignment." Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her tablet in hand. "Captain, if I may." The original passenger, Jerome Hamilton, had a confirmed paid first-class seat. No rebooking authorization was issued by operations or crew scheduling. Torres looked at the tablet screen, then at Victoria, then at Bradford Mitchell, who was pretending not to listen to the conversation. "So you moved a confirmed passenger to accommodate another passenger without operational authorization. The Diamond Elite member had priority seating privileges," Victoria said, her voice becoming defensive. "Priority seating gives them access to preferred seats when available, not the right to displace other confirmed passengers," Torres replied. "Did you document this incident?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria realized she was standing at the edge of a very deep hole that she'd dug for herself. "I'll file the report after we reach cruise altitude," she said finally. Torres nodded slowly. "Elena, I want you to file a separate crew report. Include timeline passenger details and your observations. Send it directly to crew management and copy me." Elena's fingers were already moving across her tablet screen. "Yes, sir." As Torres returned to the cockpit, his own mind was working through the implications. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Skyline's Crew Operations Center, Flight 447. "Need passenger service incident review. Potential discrimination complaint. Recommend corporate legal involvement." The message reached Skyline Airways' 24-hour operations center at 8:23 p.m. The duty manager, a veteran airline employee named Robert Chen, read it twice before picking up his phone. "Get me passenger relations. We might have a problem." 5 minutes later, Rachel Turner's video hit 100,000 views. The comments section was exploding. "This is exactly why I don't fly anymore. Sue them. This is pure discrimination. I work for a competing airline and this is disgusting. Everyone needs to share this until Skyline Airways responds. Boycott. Skyline. #Skyline shame." In the business class cabin, Jerome Hamilton watched his phone light up with notifications. Colleagues, friends, and business partners were seeing the video and reaching out with support and outrage. But Jerome wasn't thinking about sympathy. He was thinking about leverage. His company, Hamilton Global Freight, had worked with Skyline Airways for 8 years. They hauled cargo in the airline's bellies on transatlantic routes. They provided ground logistics for international shipments. They'd helped Skyline expand into freight markets that competitors couldn't touch. The partnership was worth more than money. It was strategic, operational, and deeply integrated into both companies' success. And now, because a flight attendant couldn't see past her own prejudices, all of that was in jeopardy. Jerome opened his laptop and pulled up the Hamilton Global Contracts database. With a few keystrokes, he accessed the master agreement with Skyline Airways. The document was 847 pages long, covering everything from cargo weight specifications to payment terms to termination clauses. Section 23(7) caught his attention. Either party may suspend performance of this agreement with 48-hour notice if the other party engages in conduct that materially damages the business relationship or public reputation of the contracting entities. Jerome smiled grimly. Victoria Nash had just handed him exactly the clause he needed. His phone buzzed with a text from David Park Video, now at 250,000 views. Hashtag Skyline Shame trending nationally. CNN reaching out for comment. "What's our response?" Jerome typed back. "No comment until Monday, but make sure our legal team reviews every contract we have with Skyline, every single one." As Flight 447 finally pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Jerome Hamilton settled back in his business class seat and closed his eyes. He wasn't planning to sleep. He was planning to dismantle an airline's assumptions about who deserved respect one contract at a time. The Boeing 777 shuddered slightly as it lifted off from Miami International Airport, carrying its cargo of passengers into the humid Florida night. In Seat 1, a Bradford Mitchell raised his champagne glass in a private toast to himself. In business class, Jerome Hamilton opened his laptop and began what would become the most expensive lesson in customer service in airline history. By the time Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, Rachel Turner's video had exploded across social media platforms like wildfire in dry grass. The original TikTok post had been shared to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. Each platform amplified the outrage, adding new voices to a growing chorus of condemnation. At Skyline Airways was being tagged in thousands of posts. The airline's social media team, a skeleton crew working the weekend night shift, watched in horror as their mentions became a tsunami of negative publicity. "This is Rachel Turner on Skyline Airways Flight 447. The video began showing Jerome Hamilton's dignified walk down the jet bridge. "I just watched a black passenger get removed from his paid first-class seat to make room for a white passenger. This is 2024 people. This is not okay." The video quality was crystal clear. Jerome's composed demeanor was evident. Victoria Nash's dismissive attitude was unmistakable. Bradford Mitchell's entitled satisfaction was nauseating. Within 2 hours of takeoff, hashtag Skyline Shame was trending nationally. The comments weren't just expressions of outrage. They were threats of boycotts, promises to switch airlines, and demands for federal investigations. Passengers were posting their own stories of discrimination, creating a digital avalanche of similar experiences across the aviation industry. Same thing happened to my daughter on Skyline last year. She was removed from her seat for a deadheading pilot who turned out to be a white passenger complaining about sitting next to a black family. "I'm a Diamond Elite member, and I'm canceling my status. This is disgusting. Everyone needs to screen record this before Skyline Airways tries to make it disappear. Tag the news outlets at CNN, at MSNBC, at Fox News. This needs to go mainstream." And it did. By 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, CNN's social media team had picked up the story. Their aviation reporter, Jessica Martinez, was already drafting a piece about discrimination in airline customer service using Rachel's video as the centerpiece. "Passenger allegedly removed from first-class seat due to racial discrimination," read the CNN notification that pinged on phones across the country. In Charlotte, North Carolina, David Park's phone had been ringing non-stop since the video went viral. Hamilton Global Freight's modest public relations team was completely overwhelmed by media requests. Major news outlets, aviation trade publications, and civil rights organizations all wanted statements from Jerome Hamilton. David's instructions were clear. No comments until Monday. Refer all inquiries to our legal department. but internally, Hamilton Global was mobilizing like a military operation. The company's legal team, led by senior counsel Maria Santos, had spent the evening reviewing every contract between Hamilton Global and Skyline Airways. What they found was a web of interconnected agreements that made Skyline Airways heavily dependent on Hamilton Global's services. Cargo transport agreements, $45 million annually. Ground logistics contracts, $31 million annually. International freight partnerships, $44 million annually. Equipment leasing arrangements, $12 million annually. Total annual value, $132 million with the 3-year renewal, bringing the total relationship value to nearly $400 million. More importantly, Hamilton Global had become integral to Skyline's operations. Their trucks moved cargo at 12 major airports. Their warehouses stored international shipments for onward distribution. Their logistics software integrated directly with Skyline's freight management systems. Terminating the relationship wouldn't just cost Skyline money. It would create operational chaos. Meanwhile, on Flight 447, Elena Rodriguez was documenting everything. Her incident report had grown to 3 pages of detailed observations, timestamps, and direct quotes. She'd reviewed the security camera footage available to crew and confirmed that Jerome Hamilton had been completely compliant throughout the interaction. More troubling, Elena had started researching Victoria Nash's service record. What she found made her stomach turn. Over the past 18 months, Victoria had been involved in 12 passenger reassignment incidents. In 10 of those cases, the passengers moved were people of color. In 8 cases, the passengers given priority were white. The pattern was unmistakable but apparently uninvestigated. Elena made a decision that would change her career. She encrypted her findings and sent them directly to Skyline Airways' corporate compliance department, copying the CEO's office. At 11:45 p.m., as Flight 447 began its descent into JFK Airport, Victoria Nash finally understood that something was seriously wrong. Her supervisor had sent 3 increasingly urgent text messages asking for her incident report. The crew scheduling department wanted a detailed explanation of the seat reassignment. And most ominously, corporate security had requested copies of all passenger interaction recordings from Flight 447. Elena Victoria called out as they prepared for landing. "Did you file that incident report I mentioned?" Elena looked up from her tablet, her dark eyes steady and unafraid. "Yes, I did." Very thoroughly. The landing was smooth, but the storm was just beginning. As passengers deplaned at JFK Bradford, Mitchell strode through the terminal with the confidence of a man who'd gotten everything he wanted. He had no idea that his moment of entitled satisfaction had cost him far more than a first-class upgrade was worth. Rachel Turner posted a follow-up video in the terminal. "We've landed at JFK." That video now has over 400,000 views and hashtag Skyline. Shame is trending nationwide. At Skyline, Airways still hasn't responded. This is what accountability looks like in 2024. Jerome Hamilton collected his bags from the carousel with the patience of a man who knew that the real show was just beginning. His phone showed 47 missed calls, 156 text messages, and 89 emails. He ignored them all and called David Park. "David, what's our status, Jerome? This has exploded beyond anything we anticipated. The video has nearly 500,000 views. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News are all running stories. Civil rights organizations are calling for federal investigations. And Skyline's stock price dropped 3% in after-hours trading." Jerome climbed into his waiting car, a modest Lincoln sedan, driven by his regular driver, Miguel, who'd been with Hamilton Global for 6 years. "Mr. Hamilton," Miguel said, glancing in the rearview mirror, "I saw the video on my daughter's TikTok. Man, I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm proud of how you handled yourself." "Thank you, Miguel. Sometimes dignity is all we have." As the sedan pulled away from JFK into the Queen's night, Jerome made his final call of the evening. "Amanda Chen, please. Tell her Jerome Hamilton is calling about Flight 447. Amanda Chen, CEO of Skyline Airways, was in her Westchester home when her phone rang at 12:47 a.m. She'd already been awakened twice by emergency calls from her crisis management team about the viral video and its impact on the company's reputation. Now Jerome Hamilton was calling her directly. "Jerome, I am so deeply sorry about what happened tonight. This is not representative of Skyline Airways' values or standards. I want to personally," Amanda Jerome interrupted gently. "I appreciate the call, but we need to discuss this in person. There are operational implications that go far beyond an apology." Operational implications. "I assume your people have reviewed our partnership agreements by now. You understand that Hamilton Global has the contractual right to suspend operations when our business relationship has been materially damaged." Amanda Chen felt the blood drain from her face. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the Hamilton Global Master Agreement, scrolling frantically to the termination clauses. "Jerome, surely we can resolve this without Amanda at 8 a.m. Monday morning, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. My board will review our entire relationship with Skyline Airways. Whether that relationship continues depends entirely on how seriously you take what happened tonight. What do you need from us?" Jerome looked out the car window at the lights of Manhattan growing larger in the distance. "Justice, Amanda. Not just an apology. Justice." The line went quiet for several seconds. "I'll see you Monday morning," Jerome said finally. "And Amanda, you might want to prepare your board for some difficult questions about discrimination policies and crew training. This is going to get much bigger before it gets smaller." After hanging up, Jerome leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. He thought about his father, who'd built the first Hamilton Global truck from spare parts and driven it himself for 12 years. He thought about his daughter, who would never have to experience what happened tonight if he did his job right. And he thought about the 847-page contract sitting in Hamilton Global's servers that could bring a major airline to its knees. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Sunday morning arrived like a thunderstorm breaking over Skyline Airways' corporate headquarters in Atlanta. By 6 a.m., Rachel Turner's video had surpassed 1 million views across all platforms. The hashtag #SkylineShame hashtag was trending in 12 countries, and Amanda Chen's phone had been ringing non-stop since 4:30 a.m. "Ma'am, we have a situation," said Jennifer Walsh, Skyline's head of communications, her voice tight with stress as she entered Amanda's emergency response suite. "The video has gone global. BBC picked it up 3 hours ago. Al Jazeera is running it as part of a segment on American airline discrimination, and CNN is leading their morning show with it." Amanda stared at the wall of monitors displaying social media feeds, news coverage, and stock market data. Skyline Airways' share price had dropped 8% since European markets opened, wiping out nearly $200 million in market capitalization in a single weekend. "What's our response strategy?" "That's the problem," Jennifer replied. "Every response we've drafted is getting torn apart by legal. The passenger was clearly wronged, but admitting fault opens us up to massive liability. And we still don't know who Jerome Hamilton is beyond what's in the passenger manifest." At that moment, Sarah Chen, Skyline's head of cargo operations, burst through the conference room doors. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her tablet. "Amanda, we have a much bigger problem than social media. What do you mean, Jerome Hamilton? I know that name. He's the CEO of Hamilton Global Freight." The room went silent. Amanda felt her stomach drop into her shoes. "Hamilton Global, our freight partner." "Not just a partner," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They handle 23% of our cargo volume. The partnership is worth over $120 million annually, and their contract renewal is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Jennifer Walsh dropped her tablet. The implications hit the room like a physical force. "Are you telling me," Amanda said slowly, "that we discriminated against a passenger who controls a 9-figure contract with our airline?" "It gets worse," Sarah continued. "Hamilton Global doesn't just ship with us. They provide ground logistics at 12 major airports. They handle our international freight customs clearance. They manage our cargo warehouses in Miami, Atlanta, and Charlotte. If they pull out..." Amanda didn't need Sarah to finish the sentence. Losing Hamilton Global would cripple Skyline's freight operations and cost hundreds of millions in lost revenue and operational restructuring. Meanwhile, in Hamilton Global's Charlotte headquarters, David Park was orchestrating the most complex corporate response in the company's history. The modest freight company had become the center of a national conversation about discrimination and corporate accountability. David, line 3 is the Washington Post. Line 4 is 60 Minutes. Line 7 is the NAACP's Corporate Accountability Division, announced Lisa Rodriguez, the company's overwhelmed receptionist. "Same message for everyone," David replied. "Mr. Hamilton will make a statement Monday morning after our board meeting." The board meeting itself had become a war council. Hamilton Global's 5-member board included Jerome, 2 independent directors, the company's CFO, and Maria Santos, the general counsel who'd spent the weekend becoming an expert on airline service contracts. "The contract termination clause is ironclad," Maria explained to the board via emergency video conference. Section 23.7 gives us the right to suspend all operations with 48-hour notice if Skyline engages in conduct that damages our business relationship or reputation. "What's our exposure if we terminate?" asked CFO Robert Kim. "Financially minimal. We have alternate shipping arrangements with Delta Cargo and United Freight that could absorb 90% of the volume within 60 days. "But Jerome, this isn't really about money, is it?" Jerome, sitting in his home office in Manhattan, looked out at Central Park, where families were enjoying Sunday afternoon picnics. "No, Maria. It's not about money. It's about sending a message that dignity isn't negotiable." "What kind of message?" asked board member Patricia Valdez, a veteran logistics executive who'd joined Hamilton Global 3 years earlier. "That when you treat people like they don't belong there are consequences. Real consequences that go beyond apologies and public relations statements." The board call lasted 2 hours. By the end, Jerome had unanimous support for whatever action he deemed appropriate. Back at Skyline Airways, the crisis was deepening by the hour. Victoria Nash had been called in for emergency meetings with human resources, legal, and corporate security. Her pattern of passenger reassignments was under full investigation, and what investigators were finding made the Friday night incident look like part of a much larger problem. 12 incidents in 18 months reported HR Director Michael Torres no relation to the pilot. 10 involving passengers of color being moved to accommodate white passengers. 8 involving complaints that were never properly escalated. And 3 involving threats of security removal for what appears to be completely compliant passenger behavior. Amanda Chen felt sick. How did this pattern go unnoticed? The incidents were reported to different supervisors, processed by different departments, and filed in different systems. Nobody connected the dots until Elena Rodriguez's report triggered a comprehensive review. Elena Rodriguez herself had become an unlikely hero. Her detailed incident report and follow-up investigation had exposed a culture of casual discrimination that went far beyond one flight attendant's poor judgment. Elena documented everything, Michael continued. Timestamps, direct quotes, policy violations, even passenger reactions. She built an airtight case that this was discriminatory treatment without operational justification. Where is Victoria Nash, now suspended pending full investigation? But Amanda, that's not our biggest problem anymore. Amanda was almost afraid to ask. What is CNN just published a full investigative piece on Jerome Hamilton? He's not just any freight company CEO. His company went from one truck to a $200 million operation in 15 years. He's been profiled in Forbes, Fortune, and Harvard Business Review. He sits on 3 corporate boards and advises the Department of Transportation on freight modernization. The article, written by business reporter Kevin Martinez, painted Jerome as exactly the kind of business leader companies dream of partnering with, innovative, reliable, and influential in industry circles that mattered to Skyline's bottom line. The man Skyline Airways humiliated on Flight 447, Martinez wrote, wasn't just a passenger. He was one of their most valuable business partners, a self-made entrepreneur whose company generates more than $100 million in annual revenue for the airline he was discriminated against. The article included quotes from other business leaders, logistics industry experts, and civil rights advocates, all expressing shock at Skyline's treatment of Jerome and calling for accountability measures that went beyond apologies. By Sunday evening, #Skyline. Shame had generated more than 2.3 million social media interactions. The airline's customer service phones were overwhelmed with calls from passengers canceling flights and demanding refunds. 3 major corporate clients had issued public statements questioning their travel partnerships with Skyline. Most ominously, the Federal Aviation Administration had announced they would be reviewing all aspects of the incident to ensure compliance with federal anti-discrimination regulations. Amanda Chen's emergency response team had grown to 12 people working around the clock on crisis management, legal strategy, and operational planning, but every strategy they developed ran into the same problem. How do you apologize for the unforgivable to someone who has the power to destroy your business? We could offer him free flights for life, suggested the marketing director. He can afford to buy his own airline, Jennifer Walsh replied. This isn't about compensation. Corporate partnership expansion. He already has the contracts he wants, and after Friday night, he might not want them with us. Board seat consulting contract equity partnership. None of that addresses the core issue, Amanda said finally. We discriminated against a passenger, and now the entire world is watching to see if we're serious about preventing it from happening again. The room fell silent. Everyone understood that Monday morning's conversation with Jerome Hamilton would determine whether Skyline Airways emerged from this crisis stronger or found itself at the center of a business catastrophe that would define corporate accountability for years to come. At 11:30 p.m. Sunday, Jerome Hamilton's phone rang one final time. Jerome. It's Amanda again. I know it's late, but I wanted you to know that we've suspended Victoria Nash pending a full investigation. We're implementing immediate policy changes and mandatory training for all customer-facing employees. Jerome was in his study reviewing Hamilton Global's operational contingency plans. Amanda, I appreciate the call, but policy changes and training programs are where conversations start, not where they end. What do you mean? I mean that Monday morning you're going to have to convince me that Skyline Airways is serious about treating all passengers with dignity and respect. And convincing me is going to require more than PowerPoint presentations and HR memos. What do you need to see? Jerome looked at a framed photo on his desk, his daughter graduating from Columbia Business School, the first Hamilton to earn an MBA, standing proud in her cap and gown. Justice Amanda. Real justice. The kind that changes culture, not just policies. Monday morning was 8 hours away. Monday, 6 a.m. Hamilton Global Freight Headquarters buzzed with the controlled urgency of a military command center. David Park arrived to find the parking lot filled with news vans, camera crews, and reporters, hoping for a statement from Jerome Hamilton. Security at the main entrance, alternate routes for essential personnel only. David instructed the overnight security team. Nobody talks to media without authorization. Inside the building, Hamilton Global's emergency response protocols were in full effect. The company's modest conference room had been converted into a crisis management center, with laptops displaying real-time social media feeds, news coverage, and most importantly, operational data from the Skyline Airways partnership. Maria Santos, the general counsel, had arrived at 4 a.m. to finalize the legal framework for what they were internally calling Operation Dignity. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Jerome. The termination language is bulletproof, Maria reported as Jerome entered at 6:30 a.m. Section 23.7 allows us to suspend operations immediately upon notice. Section 23.8 requires Skyline to maintain service standards that don't damage either company's reputation. Friday night's incident clearly violated both clauses. Jerome poured himself coffee from the machine that had been running since 5 a.m. His suit was his usual understated perfection, a charcoal Ermenegildo Zegna with a burgundy tie. But his eyes carried the steely determination of a man who'd built an empire from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone diminish it. What's our operational exposure if we execute this? CFO Robert Kim pulled up spreadsheets on his laptop. Minimal financial impact to us, catastrophic impact to Skyline. Our contracts with Delta Cargo and FedEx Trade Networks can absorb 85% of the volume within 30 days. The remaining 15% moves to independent carriers we already work with. And our employees. Nobody loses their jobs. Some route reassignments, some schedule changes, but we're actually in a position to expand with other carriers if this goes full termination. Jerome nodded. And Skyline's exposure. That's where it gets interesting, David Park interjected. Hamilton Global doesn't just provide cargo shipping for Skyline. We're integrated into their operations at a level that makes us nearly irreplaceable in the short term. David pulled up a presentation that his team had worked on all weekend. The scope of Hamilton Global's relationship with Skyline Airways was staggering. Cargo operations, Hamilton Global trucks were the primary cargo transport at 12 major airports. Skyline's freight schedules were built around Hamilton Global's logistics network, customs processing. Hamilton Global's bonded warehouses handled 67% of Skyline's international freight customs clearance, a specialized operation that took months to transition to new providers. Equipment leasing Skyline leased 23 cargo handling vehicles directly from Hamilton Global with maintenance contracts that required specialized training. Technology integration. The company's logistics software was deeply integrated with real-time tracking systems that shared data across platforms. International partnerships. Hamilton Global's relationships with European and Asian freight companies were essential to Skyline's overseas expansion plans. If we terminate immediately, David concluded Skyline doesn't just lose revenue, they lose operational capability. Their freight division would be crippled within weeks. Jerome studied the data with the analytical mind that had built Hamilton Global from a single truck into a freight empire. And the legal exposure Clean Maria confirmed. We're not breaching contract. We're exercising legitimate termination rights based on Skyline's breach of service standards. They can't sue us, and they can't stop us. At 7 a.m., Jerome made the call that would change everything. Amanda, it's Jerome Hamilton. I'm calling to formally notify you that Hamilton Global is exercising our rights under Section 23.7 of our Master Services Agreement. Effective immediately, we are suspending all operations with Skyline Airways pending resolution of Friday night's incident. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 8 seconds. Jerome, please, can we discuss this in person? I'm prepared to offer significant compensation and policy changes that address Amanda. Jerome interrupted gently. This notification is not a negotiating position, it's a statement of fact. Hamilton Global trucks will stop moving Skyline cargo at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Our warehouses will stop processing Skyline shipments at 9 a.m. Our customs clearance operations will be suspended by noon. but Jerome that will disrupt thousands of shipments, affect international commerce, create regulatory issues with customs and border protection. Yes, it will. Just like Friday night disrupted my travel plans and affected my trust in Skyline Airways' commitment to treating customers with dignity. Jerome's voice remained calm professional, but carried an undertone of absolute finality. We can resume operations when Skyline demonstrates that discriminatory treatment of passengers is not just discouraged, but impossible. After ending the call, Jerome turned to his team. Execute the suspension. Every contract, every operation, every partnership activity with Skyline Airways stops as of 8 a.m. At 7:45 a.m., Hamilton global managers at airports from Miami to Seattle received identical instructions. Suspend all Skyline Airways cargo operations immediately. Secure all equipment and inventory. Await further instructions. The impact was immediate and visible. At Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Skyline's primary hub, Hamilton Global Trucks, simply stopped moving. Cargo containers destined for European flights sat unloaded. International shipments awaiting customs clearance backed up in bonded warehouses. Skyline cargo managers watched in horror as their logistics network ground to a halt. "This is unprecedented," said Skyline's cargo operations director, frantically calling supervisors. "Hamilton Global is our primary ground transport. We don't have backup capacity for this volume." Similar scenes played out at every major airport where Skyline operated freight services. In Miami, $2.3 million worth of pharmaceutical shipments destined for South America sat stranded. In Los Angeles, automotive parts bound for Asian factories were trapped in customs processing limbo. In New York, financial documents and legal materials for European banks could not be processed for international delivery. By 9 a.m., Skyline's Cargo Operations Center looked like a disaster response facility. Red alerts flashed on monitoring screens. Phones rang constantly with complaints from corporate clients whose shipments were delayed indefinitely. Operational managers who had never heard of Hamilton Global Freight suddenly understood that their entire division depended on a company whose CEO they'd humiliated 3 days earlier. Amanda Chen's phone began ringing at 8:07 a.m. "Amanda, this is Richard Palmer at Palmer Industries. Our $4 million shipment to Germany was supposed to leave Atlanta this morning. Your people are telling me it's indefinitely delayed. Richard, we're experiencing some operational challenges with our freight partner. I don't care about your operational challenges. I care about my shipment. If Skyline can't handle basic logistics, Palmer Industries will find an airline that can." The call ended abruptly. It was the first of dozens Amanda would receive that morning. Meanwhile, Jerome Hamilton was conducting the most unusual board meeting in Hamilton Global's history. Instead of discussing quarterly earnings or expansion plans, they were orchestrating the precise dismantling of a $120 million partnership. "Phase 1 is complete," David Park reported. "All ground operations suspended. Skyline's cargo managers are already calling their backup carriers, but none have the capacity to handle this volume immediately." "Phase 2, Jerome asked. "International customs processing. Our bonded warehouses will stop accepting Skyline shipments at noon. That affects $8.7 million in daily international freight. And Phase 3 equipment and technology. We can remotely disable our logistics software integration with Skyline systems. Their freight tracking and scheduling will be operating blind within 24 hours. Jerome considered this carefully. Hamilton Global had built its reputation on reliability, precision, and professional excellence. Even in terminating a relationship, those standards had to be maintained. Execute Phase 2 at noon as scheduled. But for Phase 3, give them 48 hours notice. We're not sabotaging them. We're exercising our contractual rights professionally. And if they try to replace our services, Maria Santos looked up from her laptop. They can try. But building the operational relationships we've developed takes years, not days. In the short term, they're dependent on us, whether they like it or not. At 10:30 a.m., Jerome's phone rang with a call he'd been expecting. "Mr. Hamilton, this is Senator Patricia Williams from the Senate Commerce Committee. I understand you're involved in the Skyline Airways discrimination incident that's been in the news." Jerome had met Senator Williams twice at Transportation Department conferences. She was known as a fierce advocate for civil rights and corporate accountability. "Senator, I appreciate your call. Yes, I was the passenger discriminated against on Friday night. Mr. Hamilton, I want you to know that my office is monitoring this situation closely. The video evidence suggests clear violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. But I'm more concerned about reports that you're using your business relationship to retaliate against the airline." Jerome had expected this conversation and was prepared for it. "Senator Hamilton Global is exercising our legitimate contractual rights to suspend operations with a business partner whose conduct has damaged our professional relationship. We're not retaliating. We're protecting our company's reputation and values. But the operational impact on interstate commerce, on international shipments, on other businesses. Senator, with respect, Skyline Airways should have considered those consequences before they decided that paying passengers could be moved based on racial assumptions rather than ticket validity." The senator was quiet for several seconds. "Mr. Hamilton, what would it take for you to resume operations accountability, Senator? Real accountability that demonstrates Skyline. Airways is serious about treating all passengers with dignity and respect. Not just policy changes, not just apologies, but structural changes that make discrimination impossible, not just discouraged. And if they don't provide that accountability..." Jerome looked out his office window at the Hamilton Global truck fleet preparing for a day of operations that would not include Skyline Airways. "Then they'll learn that there are consequences for treating people like they don't belong. And those consequences extend far beyond one passenger's inconvenience." By noon Monday, Skyline Airways had lost operational control of 23% of their cargo capacity. Their stock price had dropped 12% since Friday night. And Amanda Chen was preparing for the most important meeting of her career, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether Skyline Airways emerged from this crisis or became a cautionary tale about the cost of discrimination. The emergency board meeting at Skyline Airways began at 1 p.m. Monday in the airline's glass-walled conference room overlooking Atlanta's skyline. 7 directors, 3 executives, and a team of crisis management consultants stared at financial projections that looked like a medical chart for a patient in critical condition. "Gentlemen, ladies." Amanda Chen began, her voice steady. "Despite the chaos surrounding the company, we are facing an existential threat to our freight operations and potentially to Skyline Airways as a whole." Board Chairman Michael Davidson, a veteran airline executive who'd survived 3 industry downturns, pulled off his reading glasses and rubbed his temples. "Amanda, help me understand how removing one passenger from a first-class seat has led to a $47 million operational crisis in 3 days." Amanda clicked to the first slide of what would become known internally as the Hamilton presentation. A photograph of Jerome Hamilton filled the screen, taken from his company's corporate website. A dignified man in a navy suit standing in front of a Hamilton Global Freight terminal with the company logo clearly visible. Jerome Hamilton, age 45, CEO and founder of Hamilton Global Freight. 15-year partnership with Skyline Airways worth $120 million annually. His company handles 23% of our cargo. Volume operates our customs clearance for international shipments and provides ground logistics at 12 major airports. The room was completely silent. On Friday evening, our crew removed Mr. Hamilton from his paid first-class seat to accommodate another passenger. The incident was recorded, went viral, and has now generated 3.2 million social media interactions under the hashtag #SkylineShame. And his response asked board member Sarah Coleman. At 8 a.m. this morning, Hamilton Global suspended all operations with Skyline Airways. Every truck, every warehouse, every customs processing facility, Our freight division is effectively paralyzed. The financial director, Robert Torres, pulled up real-time operational data on his laptop. Since 8 a.m., we've had 47 cargo shipments stranded at various airports. International deliveries worth $12.8 million are stuck in customs processing, and we've received cancellation notices from 6 major corporate clients who can't risk shipping delays. Amanda advanced to the next slide, a timeline showing the cascade of operational failures triggered by Hamilton Global's suspension. 8 o'clock a.m. Ground transportation halted at 12 airports, 9 o'clock a.m. Warehouse operations suspended 10:30 a.m. First client complaints received 11 o'clock a.m. Backup carriers contacted insufficient capacity 12 o'clock p.m. International customs processing suspended 1 o'clock p.m. Stock price down 15% from Friday close. The financial impact extends beyond lost revenue, Amanda continued. Replacing Hamilton Global's services requires establishing new relationships with multiple vendors, meeting customs, bonding requirements, and rebuilding technology integrations. Industry experts estimate 18 to 24 months for full operational replacement. Board member Patricia Valdez, who'd spent 30 years in airline operations, shook her head in disbelief. How did our crew management not know who Jerome Hamilton was? Don't we have passenger recognition protocols for major business partners? Jennifer Walsh, head of communications, answered reluctantly. We have VIP recognition for Diamond Elite members and celebrity passengers, but we don't cross-reference business partnerships with passenger manifests. Jerome Hamilton traveled under his personal frequent flyer account, not a corporate designation. So our crew had no idea they were discriminating against one of our most important business partners. Correct. But that's not the real problem, Jennifer replied. The real problem is that our crew discriminated against a paying passenger period. Jerome Hamilton's business relationship with us makes the consequences more severe, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. Michael Davidson leaned forward. What exactly happened on that flight? I want details, not summaries. Amanda pulled up Elena Rodriguez's incident report, which had become the company's primary source of documentation for the event. Lead purser Victoria Nash removed Jerome Hamilton from seat 1A to accommodate Bradford Mitchell, a Diamond Elite member who demanded what he called his usual seat. On what authority? None that we can identify. Jerome Hamilton had a confirmed paid first-class reservation. Bradford Mitchell was assigned to seat 2B, which he rejected. Victoria Nash made an unauthorized decision to prioritize Mitchell based on his status level. Was there any operational justification? Overbooking safety issue, medical accommodation? None. The aircraft was not overbooked. No safety or medical issues were documented. Elena Rodriguez's report indicates that Victoria Nash made assumptions about Jerome Hamilton based on his appearance and assumed Bradford Mitchell deserved preferential treatment. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Board members who'd built their careers on operational excellence were appalled by what amounted to a complete breakdown of professional standards. Where is Victoria Nash now? Asked legal counsel Maria Santos. Suspended pending investigation. But our review has uncovered a pattern of similar incidents over the past 18 months. Victoria Nash has been involved in 12 passenger reassignment cases, 10 involving passengers of color being moved to accommodate white passengers. 12 cases. Michael Davidson's voice carried a dangerous edge, and nobody noticed a pattern. The incidents were handled by different supervisors and filed in different systems. Elena Rodriguez's detailed report triggered a comprehensive review that revealed the pattern for the first time. Amanda clicked to a slide showing Victoria Nash's service record, with incident dates, passenger demographics, and resolution details. The pattern was unmistakable and legally damning. Our legal exposure from the discrimination pattern extends far beyond Friday night's incident, Maria Santos reported. We're potentially liable for civil rights violations, creating hostile environments for passengers and failing to maintain adequate anti-discrimination training. What about Bradford Mitchell Diamond Elite status, revoked this morning? His corporate account shows irregular payment history and multiple complaints about demanding special treatment. His behavior on Friday night violated our customer conduct policies. The financial implications were staggering, but board member Patricia Valdez focused on the operational reality. Even if we resolve the legal issues, how do we get Hamilton Global back? Jerome. Hamilton has every right to terminate our relationship, and frankly, after what we did to him, I wouldn't blame him if he never worked with us again. Amanda had been dreading this question because the answer was both simple and terrifying. We don't get Hamilton Global back unless Jerome Hamilton decides to forgive us, and forgiveness in this case requires demonstrating that Skyline Airways has fundamentally changed how we treat passengers. What does he want? That's what we're going to find out at 3 p.m. Jerome Hamilton has agreed to meet with me personally to discuss resolution. The room fell silent again. Everyone understood that the next 2 hours would determine Skyline Airways' future. Meanwhile, across town, in a downtown Atlanta hotel conference room, Jerome Hamilton was conducting his own meeting with a very different agenda. David, what's our timeline for complete operational transition away from Skyline Airways? David Park consulted his tablet. Delta Cargo can absorb 60% of the volume within 2 weeks. FedEx Trade Networks can handle another 25% within 30 days. The remaining 15% moves to regional carriers we're already partnered with. Financial impact to Hamilton Global. Short-term revenue reduction of about 8%. But we've got 3 other airlines interested in expanded partnerships. Long-term, this could actually accelerate our growth if we diversify our client base. Jerome nodded. Hamilton Global had grown large enough that losing one major client, even one as significant as Skyline Airways, wouldn't threaten the company's stability. But this had never been about financial survival. Maria. What's the legal framework for permanent termination, ironclad general counsel? Maria Santos replied. The discrimination incident gives us cause for immediate termination without penalty. Skyline Airways has no legal recourse to force continuation of the relationship, and if they try to pressure us through regulatory channels or industry connections. Jerome, you sit on 3 corporate boards and advise the Department of Transportation. Your reputation in the logistics industry is impeccable. If anything, regulatory agencies are more likely to support our position than Skyline's. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text message from Senator Patricia Williams monitoring the situation. Federal Commerce Committee supports accountability measures that address discrimination in transportation. You have our backing. The message confirmed what Jerome had suspected. This incident had attracted attention far beyond social media outrage. Federal lawmakers, civil rights organizations, and industry regulators were all watching to see how corporate accountability would be enforced. There's one more factor to consider, David added. Our employees are watching this too. How we handle discrimination against our CEO sends a message about how we'll protect them if they face similar treatment. Jerome looked around the table at his leadership team people who'd helped him build Hamilton Global into a company that employed 847 people across 12 states. Many of those employees had faced discrimination in their careers, had been told they didn't belong, had been made to feel less than worthy of respect. You're right, David. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about whether we accept discrimination as a cost of doing business or whether we demand better. At 2:30 p.m., Jerome Hamilton walked into the Skyline Airways headquarters building through a gauntlet of news cameras and reporters. He wore the same charcoal Ermenegildo Zegna suit he'd worn that morning, but now it carried the weight of a $120 million decision that would determine the future of both companies. Amanda Chen was waiting in the executive conference room, flanked by lawyers, board members, and crisis management consultants. Jerome arrived with only David Park and General Counsel Maria Santos. The 2 groups sat across from each other like negotiators ending a war. Jerome Amanda began. I want to start by offering you and Hamilton Global our deepest apologies for Friday night's incident. What happened was unacceptable, discriminatory, and completely contrary to Skyline Airways' values. Jerome listened without interrupting, his expression neutral but attentive. We've suspended Victoria Nash pending termination. We've revoked Bradford Mitchell's Diamond Elite status. We're implementing mandatory discrimination training for all customer-facing employees. And we're prepared to offer Hamilton Global expanded partnership terms that recognize the value of our relationship. Amanda slid a folder across the table. A $15 million increase in annual partnership value priority processing for all Hamilton Global shipments and executive-level oversight of any service issues. Jerome opened the folder, reviewed the proposal for exactly 90 seconds, then closed it and slid it back across the table. Amanda, this proposal addresses the symptoms, not the disease. What do you mean? Jerome leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. You're offering me money and special treatment. But Friday night wasn't about money, and it wasn't about special treatment. It was about basic human dignity and respect. What do you need to see from us? Jerome looked around the room at the faces watching him, understanding that his next words would determine whether Skyline Airways learned from this crisis or simply tried to buy their way out of it. I need to see that Skyline Airways understands that every passenger deserves the same dignity I was denied. Not just CEOs, not just business partners, not just people who can afford first-class seats. Everyone. The meeting was just beginning. The silence in Skyline Airways' executive conference room stretched for nearly 30 seconds as Jerome Hamilton's words settled over the assembled executives and board members. Amanda Chen realized that the carefully prepared compensation package, legal settlements, and policy reforms they'd spent the weekend developing had completely missed the point. Amanda said, "Finally, help us understand what accountability looks like from your perspective." Jerome glanced at David Park and Maria Santos, then back at the Skyline Airways leadership team. Amanda, let me tell you about Keisha Williams. The room shifted uncomfortably. Nobody knew who Keisha Williams was or why Jerome was bringing her up. Keisha Williams is a software engineer at Hamilton Global. She graduated summa cum laude from Georgia Tech, speaks 3 languages, and manages our logistics integration systems. She's also a single mother who flies twice a month to visit her daughter in Denver. Jerome paused, letting the human details sink in before continuing. 3 months ago, Keisha was flying Skyline Airways from Atlanta to Denver. Premium economy seat she'd saved up to purchase. The passenger next to her, a white businessman, complained that she was too loud during a phone call with her daughter. The flight attendant moved Keisha to a middle seat in regular economy without checking the validity of the complaint or offering alternative solutions. Amanda Chen felt her stomach tighten. Was this incident reported? Keisha filed a complaint with your customer service department. It was marked as resolved with a $100 voucher and a form letter apologizing for her misunderstanding. No investigation, no follow-up, no acknowledgement that moving a passenger based on another passenger's racial complaints might be problematic. Jennifer Walsh, Skyline's head of communications, was frantically typing on her laptop, pulling up customer service records. Jerome, if we can get the case number. The case number was CSS-2024-0847. But the real issue isn't one complaint or one case number. The real issue is that Keisha Williams didn't file that complaint as the employee of a major business partner. She filed it as a regular passenger who expected to be treated with basic respect. The point hit the room like a physical blow. Jerome Hamilton wasn't just seeking justice for himself. He was demanding justice for every passenger who lacked the corporate power to shut down airline operations when they were discriminated against. David Park pulled out his tablet and began reading. Since Friday night, Hamilton Global has received 847 emails from our employees, sharing their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. not just on Skyline Airways but across the industry. People who were afraid to speak up because they thought complaining about airline treatment could affect their jobs. What kind of experiences asked board member Patricia Valdez? Passengers questioned about ticket authenticity based on appearance. Families separated during seat assignments without operational justification. Business travelers assumed to be in wrong sections of the aircraft. And in every case, the response from airline customer service was minimal compensation and form letter apologies. Jerome leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful but determined. Amanda Skyline Airways' problem isn't Victoria Nash or Bradford Mitchell or even Friday night's incident. Your problem is a culture that allows discrimination to happen routinely and handles it quietly when passengers complain. Amanda Chen realized they were dealing with someone who'd thought far more deeply about accountability than her team had prepared for. What would cultural change look like in practice? First, Jerome said, acknowledge that Friday night wasn't an isolated incident. Skyline Airways has a pattern of discriminatory passenger treatment that extends far beyond Victoria Nash. We've identified 12 incidents. Elena Rodriguez identified 12 incidents involving Victoria Nash. How many other incidents involving other crew members haven't been connected? How many complaints were resolved with vouchers instead of investigations? Amanda looked at her team, none of whom had an immediate answer. Second, Jerome continued to implement real-time oversight of passenger treatment decisions. Not just policies and training, but actual monitoring systems that flag discriminatory patterns before they become legal liabilities. Maria Santos Skyline's legal counsel leaned forward. What kind of monitoring systems? Jerome's general counsel, Maria Santos, coincidentally sharing the same name, answered. Passenger advocacy systems that review all complaints involving race, ethnicity, or perceived discrimination. Independent oversight boards that include civil rights experts. Mandatory reporting to federal transportation authorities for pattern-based discrimination incidents. That level of oversight would be unprecedented in the airline industry, Amanda replied. So was Friday night's incident, Jerome said quietly. Unprecedented discrimination requires unprecedented accountability measures. The third element of Jerome's framework was the most challenging public transparency about discrimination incidents and resolution measures. Not just internal policy changes, but external reporting that allows passengers and civil rights organizations to monitor progress. Board Chairman Michael Davidson spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Jerome, what you're describing would fundamentally change how airlines handle passenger service issues across the industry. Exactly. The room was quiet as the full scope of Jerome's demands became clear. He wasn't seeking compensation or special treatment for himself. He was demanding structural changes that would protect every passenger from the kind of discrimination he'd experienced. And if Skyline Airways implements these changes, Amanda asked, then Hamilton Global will resume operations and work with you to become the industry standard for passenger dignity and respect. We'll help you turn this crisis into an opportunity to lead meaningful change. And if we don't, Jerome's expression didn't change, but his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Then Hamilton Global will terminate our partnership permanently, and we'll work with other airlines to implement these standards industry-wide. Change will happen, Amanda. The only question is whether Skyline Airways leads it or gets left behind by it. David Park added the practical implications. We've already had preliminary conversations with Delta Airlines, United Airlines, and Southwest Airlines about passenger advocacy partnerships. Other carriers are interested in differentiating themselves through dignity and respect standards. The message was clear. Jerome Hamilton had the industry relationships and business credibility to make passenger advocacy a competitive advantage for airlines that embraced it and a liability for those that didn't. Amanda Chen called for a 10-minute recess to huddle with her team. He's not negotiating, she said as soon as Jerome's team left the room. He's dictating terms for a fundamental transformation of airline customer service. The transparency requirements alone would expose us to massive legal liability, warned legal counsel Maria Santos. Every discrimination incident would become public record. But if we refuse, Jennifer Walsh pointed out, we lose $120 million in annual revenue and become the airline that chose discrimination over accountability. Board member Patricia Valdez asked the crucial question: can we actually implement what he's asking for? The real question, Michael Davidson replied, is whether we can afford not to. This incident has already cost us $47 million in operational disruption and $230 million in market cap. If Jerome Hamilton makes passenger advocacy his personal mission, he has the resources and credibility to change the entire industry. Amanda looked around the room at her leadership team, understanding that they were facing a decision that would define Skyline Airways for years to come. If we agree to his terms, we're not just resolving a customer service incident. We're committing to become a completely different kind of airline. And if we don't agree, Patricia Valdez replied, we're choosing to remain the kind of airline that discriminates against passengers and hopes they don't have the power to fight back. When the meeting resumed, Amanda Chen had made her decision. Jerome Skyline Airways accepts your framework for accountability and cultural change. We'll implement passenger advocacy systems, independent oversight, and public transparency reporting. We'll work with civil rights organizations to develop monitoring standards that ensure discriminatory treatment becomes impossible, not just discouraged. Jerome nodded slowly. And the timeline? Full implementation within 90 days. Independent Oversight Board established within 30 days. Public transparency reporting begins immediately with quarterly updates. Elena Rodriguez, promoted to Director of Passenger Advocacy, reporting directly to me. Her compensation will reflect her courage in documenting Friday night's incident and her role in preventing future discrimination. Jerome looked at his team, then back at Amanda. And Victoria Nash terminated immediately. Her pattern of discriminatory behavior will be shared with industry employment networks to prevent similar incidents at other airlines. For the first time since entering the conference room, Jerome Hamilton smiled. Amanda Hamilton Global will resume operations tomorrow morning. But more importantly, you've just committed to making Skyline Airways the standard for how airlines should treat all passengers with dignity and respect. As the two teams shook hands, everyone in the room understood that they'd just witnessed something unprecedented. A discrimination incident transformed into a blueprint for industry-wide change through the power of strategic accountability and corporate courage. The consequences would reshape airline customer service for years to come. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. The Hamilton Global Conference Room had been transformed into a different kind of corporate space, one where justice was being architected with the same precision used to build logistics networks. Jerome Hamilton sat at the head of the polished mahogany table flanked by David Park General Counsel Maria Santos and three new attendees, Dr. Angela Davis from the National Civil Rights Institute, former FAA Administrator Robert Chen, and corporate accountability expert Dr. Sarah Williams from Columbia Business School. Before we begin implementing the Skyline Airways Partnership Framework, Jerome announced we need to address the immediate accountability measures that will determine whether this becomes a model for industry change or just another corporate public relations exercise. Elena Rodriguez entered the room at exactly 9:05 a.m., wearing a navy blazer with the confidence of someone whose courage had created opportunities she'd never imagined possible. Skyline Airways had flown her to Charlotte specifically for this meeting, where she would help design the passenger advocacy systems that could prevent future discrimination. Elena Jerome stood to greet her. Thank you for traveling here. Your documentation of Friday night's incident didn't just expose one flight attendant's bias, it revealed patterns that we're going to eliminate across the entire airline industry. Dr. Angela Davis pulled out a tablet loaded with research data. Elena, your incident report has been analyzed by civil rights organizations across the country. The detail level, timestamp accuracy, and objective documentation created the strongest case for discrimination accountability we've seen in commercial aviation. Elena still seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the national attention her actions had generated. Dr. Davis, I just did what felt right. Passengers deserve to be treated with respect regardless of their race or appearance, which is exactly why Skyline Airways has promoted you to Director of Passenger Advocacy, added Dr. Sarah Williams. Your role will be creating systems that make discrimination impossible, not just discouraged. The meeting's first order of business was reviewing the framework that would transform Skyline Airways into what Jerome called the accountability standard for passenger treatment. Real-time monitoring systems. Every passenger interaction involving seating changes, complaint resolution, or special accommodations would be logged with demographic data, justification requirements, and supervisor approval processes. Independent Oversight Board. Civil rights experts, former transportation officials, and passenger advocates would review discrimination patterns quarterly and publish public reports on progress. Employee advocacy training. All customer-facing employees would receive training developed by civil rights organizations, not just corporate HR departments focusing on recognizing unconscious bias and implementing dignity-based customer service. Passenger protection protocols. Clear procedures for passengers to report discrimination in real time with guaranteed response timelines and resolution tracking that prevented cases from disappearing into customer service systems. The monitoring technology is already available, explained Dr. Robert Chen. Airlines track passenger data for operational efficiency. We're simply adding accountability layers that flag discriminatory patterns before they become legal liabilities. Jerome reviewed the implementation timeline. Elena, you'll work directly with these experts to develop training programs that address the root causes of discriminatory treatment. Not just policy compliance, but cultural change that makes respect for all passengers the foundation of airline operations. What about resistance from existing employees? Elena asked. Some crew members might see these changes as criticism of current practices. Dr. Angela Davis smiled. Elena, that's exactly the right question. Effective accountability systems anticipate resistance and address it through education, not punishment. We're not trying to shame people. We're trying to create systems where unconscious bias can't influence passenger treatment decisions. The conversation turned to the broader implications of the Skyline Airways transformation. Jerome Dr. Sarah Williams said this framework has attracted attention from federal transportation officials, civil rights organizations, and other airlines. What you're implementing with Skyline Airways could become the standard for the entire industry. David Park pulled up preliminary response data. Since Monday's announcement, Hamilton Global has been contacted by executives from Delta Airlines, United Airlines, Southwest Airlines, and JetBlue Airways. They want to understand how passenger advocacy partnerships could differentiate their customer service. And the federal response, Jerome asked. Dr. Robert Chen, with his FAA background, had unique insight. The Department of Transportation is monitoring this as a potential model for voluntary industry standards that could prevent the need for federal discrimination regulations. If it works, other airlines will adopt similar systems to avoid regulatory pressure. Elena Rodriguez raised a practical concern. What about cost? Implementing these systems requires significant investment in technology training and oversight personnel. Jerome had anticipated this question. Elena, Skyline. Airways' discrimination crisis cost them $47 million in operational disruption and $230 million in market cap losses in 3 days. Preventing discrimination is significantly cheaper than dealing with its consequences. Maria Santos added the legal perspective. The accountability systems also protect airlines from discrimination lawsuits by documenting that they've implemented industry-leading prevention measures. It's risk management disguised as civil rights advocacy. The meeting's second phase focused on personal accountability for Friday night's specific incident. Victoria Nash Jerome said reviewing her personnel file had 12 documented incidents of discriminatory passenger treatment over 18 months. How did this pattern go unnoticed? Dr. Angela Davis had studied the case extensively. Victoria Nash's incidents were processed by different supervisors filed in separate systems and resolved with minimal investigation. The pattern only became visible when Elena Rodriguez's detailed report triggered comprehensive analysis, which demonstrates why we need integrated monitoring systems, Elena added. Discrimination often looks like isolated incidents until someone connects the data. Jerome made a decision that would send ripples through the airline industry. Victoria Nash's employment termination will be shared with airline industry employment networks. Her pattern of discriminatory behavior will prevent her from moving to another carrier where she could continue harming passengers. Is that legal? Dr. Sarah Williams asked. Perfectly legal, confirmed Maria Santos. Discriminatory behavior documented through multiple incidents creates legitimate employment references that protect future passengers. The final component was addressing Bradford Mitchell's role in Friday's incident. Mr. Mitchell's Diamond Elite status has been permanently revoked, Jerome noted. But his behavior raises questions about how airlines should handle passengers who demand special treatment based on perceived entitlement. Dr. Robert Chen nodded. Bradford Mitchell's assumption that he deserved Jerome's seat because of his appearance reflects customer bias that airlines have historically accommodated rather than challenged. Elena Rodriguez had observed this dynamic throughout her airline career. Passengers like Bradford Mitchell create pressure on crew members to make discriminatory decisions. They complain loudly, demand supervisors, and threaten negative reviews if they don't get preferential treatment. Which is why Jerome concluded the new protocols include specific procedures for handling passengers who demand accommodation based on bias rather than operational necessity. Crew members will have clear authority to refuse discriminatory requests regardless of the passenger's status level. As the morning session concluded, Jerome reflected on the transformation that had begun with one incident of discrimination and evolved into an industry-wide accountability movement. Elena, Dr. Davis, Dr. Chen, Dr. Williams. What we're building here goes far beyond resolving one passenger's complaint. We're creating a framework that protects every passenger's dignity and respect, regardless of their race appearance or economic status. Elena Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant who had documented Friday night's incident with such precision, was now leading the development of systems that could transform airline customer service across the industry. Mr. Hamilton, she said 6 months ago, I was afraid to challenge discriminatory passenger treatment because I thought it might cost me my job. Now I'm designing systems that will protect other employees who want to do the right thing. The accountability meeting concluded with commitments that would reshape commercial aviation, real-time discrimination monitoring, independent oversight reporting, employee advocacy protection, and passenger dignity protocols that made respect non-negotiable. But the real test would come in the implementation, turning accountability frameworks into cultural change that protected every passenger who walked onto an aircraft expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. 6 weeks after the accountability meeting, Skyline Airways Flight 447, the same route where Jerome Hamilton had been discriminated against, was operating under completely transformed passenger service protocols. Captain Michael Torres, who had witnessed the original incident, was conducting his pre-flight cabin inspection with Elena Rodriguez, now Director of Passenger Advocacy, observing the new systems in action. Captain Torres, Elena said, reviewing her tablet. Today's passenger advocacy screening flagged 2 potential attention items: a Diamond Elite member requesting priority boarding for his family and a passenger questioning her seat assignment in premium economy. The new protocols required crew members to document any special requests or passenger concerns with demographic data, operational justification, and supervisor approval before making accommodation decisions. The goal was preventing discriminatory treatment through transparency and accountability. How are we handling the Diamond Elite request? Torres asked. The passenger has diamond status, but his family members don't. Our new policy allows family boarding priority only when operational space permits and doesn't displace other passengers with confirmed reservations. Since today's flight is full, the family boards according to their individual ticket classifications. The second situation was more complex. A Latina business traveler, Maria Gonzalez, had questioned whether her premium economy seat assignment was correct, concerned that she might have been downgraded due to appearance assumptions. Under the old system, Elena explained crew might have assumed she was confused about her ticket or trying to upgrade fraudulently. Under the new protocols, we verify her reservation through the advocacy monitoring system and address her concerns directly. Elena approached Maria Gonzalez's seat with the professionalism that had become Skyline Airways' new standard. Ms. Gonzalez, I understand you have concerns about your seat assignment. Let me verify your reservation and ensure you're receiving the service level you've paid for. The interaction was calm, respectful, and documented in real time through Elena's tablet system. Your premium economy reservation is confirmed and correct. Your seat includes priority boarding, extra legroom, and complimentary meal service. Is there anything specific about the seating arrangement that concerns you? Maria Gonzalez relaxed visibly. I'm sorry, I've just had experiences on other airlines where my seat assignments were mysteriously changed. I appreciate you checking. Ms. Gonzalez, that's exactly why we've implemented these verification systems. Every passenger deserves confirmation that they're receiving the service they've paid for, and we're committed to ensuring that happens consistently. The exchange, which took less than 3 minutes, demonstrated how accountability systems could transform routine passenger interactions. Instead of assumptions, verification. Instead of defensiveness, transparency. Instead of dismissal, respect. Captain Torres observed similar changes throughout the aircraft. Crew members were documenting interactions, verifying reservations, and treating passenger concerns as legitimate requests for service rather than potential problems to manage. The transformation extended far beyond individual flights. In Skyline Airways corporate headquarters, the weekly passenger advocacy review meeting had become the most important gathering of the week. Elena Rodriguez presented discrimination pattern analysis to senior executives, identifying trends before they became incidents. This week's data shows 0 passenger removal incidents, 3 seat reassignment requests that were handled through verification protocols, and 1 complaint about crew response time that was resolved through additional training. Elena reported to Amanda Chen and the executive team. The Independent Oversight Board, led by Dr. Angela Davis, published its first quarterly report on Skyline Airways transformation. The results were remarkable: 94% reduction in passenger discrimination complaints, 100% of seating changes now documented with operational justification, 0 incidents of passenger removal based on appearance assumptions, 97% passenger satisfaction rating for crew treatment, up from 73% pre-transformation. More importantly, other airlines were taking notice. Delta Airlines had contacted Hamilton Global about implementing similar passenger advocacy partnerships. United Airlines was developing its own discrimination monitoring systems based on Skyline's model. Southwest Airlines had hired Dr. Robert Chen as a consultant to review their customer service protocols for bias patterns. The industry transformation we hoped for is actually happening, David Park reported during Hamilton Global's monthly operations meeting. 8 major carriers have contacted us about passenger advocacy consulting services. Jerome Hamilton reviewed the broader implications. David, this proves that corporate accountability can drive positive change faster than regulatory requirements. Airlines are adopting dignity-based customer service because it's becoming a competitive advantage. The financial results supported Jerome's analysis. Skyline Airways' customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Their Net Promoter Scores measuring likelihood of customer recommendations had improved 34%. Most significantly, their revenue from business travelers had increased 12% as corporate clients specifically chose Skyline Airways for their commitment to passenger respect. Jerome Amanda Chen said during their monthly partnership review, "The passenger advocacy systems have transformed our entire corporate culture. Employees report higher job satisfaction because they have clear protocols for treating customers with dignity. Customer complaints have dropped 67% because passengers feel respected and heard." The Hamilton Global Partnership had not only resumed, but expanded. Skyline Airways had become Hamilton Global's preferred logistics partner with new routes and increased cargo capacity, reflecting the strength of their renewed relationship. But the most meaningful change was cultural. Elena Rodriguez, who had risked her career to document discrimination, had become the face of airline industry transformation. Her TEDx talk, "When Courage Creates Change," had been viewed 1.2 million times. Flight attendants from across the industry contacted her for advice on handling discriminatory passenger requests and challenging bias in airline operations. Elena Dr. Angela Davis said during a civil rights conference in Washington, D.C., "Your willingness to document discrimination and speak truth to power created a model for employee advocacy that extends far beyond the airline industry." Elena had developed training programs now used by 12 major airlines focusing on practical skills for recognizing bias, documenting incidents, and protecting passenger dignity. Her approach emphasized empowerment rather than punishment, teaching employees to see accountability as professional excellence rather than bureaucratic burden. The broader impact was measurable across the transportation industry. Federal transportation officials were studying Skyline Airways' model for potential national implementation. Civil rights organizations were working with other companies to develop similar accountability frameworks for hotels, restaurants, and retail businesses. What started as one passenger's demand for dignity, Dr. Sarah Williams noted in her Harvard Business Review analysis, has become a blueprint for transforming corporate culture through strategic accountability and employee empowerment. Jerome Hamilton reflected on the changes during a quiet moment in his office, looking out at the Hamilton global fleet of trucks that had once been leverage in a corporate dispute, but were now symbols of how business relationships could drive social progress. His assistant, David Park, knocked and entered. Jerome Southwest Airlines just signed a consulting agreement for passenger advocacy system development. That's the 8th major carrier this quarter. How many employees will be affected by these changes? Across all the airlines we're working with, about 47,000 customer-facing employees will receive dignity-based service training based on Elena Rodriguez's protocols. Jerome nodded thoughtfully. "David, when I was removed from that seat 6 weeks ago, I was angry about personal disrespect. But building these accountability systems has taught me that individual incidents are symptoms of larger cultural problems that require comprehensive solutions." The transformation was becoming permanent, embedded in operational procedures, employee training, and corporate governance structures that made discrimination not just discouraged, but impossible to sustain within airline operations. The final measure of success would be the most important, whether passengers felt safe, respected, and valued regardless of their race, appearance, or economic status. Early indicators suggested that the culture of dignity Elena Rodriguez and Jerome Hamilton had demanded was becoming the new standard for airline customer service. 3 months after Flight 447, Jerome Hamilton found himself back in Seat 1A on the exact same route from Miami to New York. This time, however, everything was different. Not just the policies and procedures, but the entire atmosphere of respect and dignity that now defined the Skyline Airways experience. Elena Rodriguez, resplendent in her new Director of Passenger Advocacy uniform, personally greeted Jerome as he boarded. "Mr. Hamilton, welcome back to Flight 447. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." "Elena, the honor is mine. You've transformed not just this airline, but the entire industry's approach to passenger dignity." The cabin itself reflected the cultural changes that had rippled through Skyline Airways. Crew members moved with confident professionalism, greeting every passenger with genuine respect. The interactions Jerome observed were natural, warm, and free of the assumptions that had characterized his previous experience. Captain Torres emerged from the cockpit for his pre-flight announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Torres. Today marks a special milestone for Skyline Airways. 3 months ago on this exact route, we learned that our customer service standards fell short of our values. Today, Flight 447 represents our commitment to treating every passenger with the dignity and respect they deserve." The announcement drew spontaneous applause from passengers who understood they were witnessing something unprecedented in commercial aviation, an airline taking public responsibility for discrimination and demonstrating tangible change. As the aircraft taxied for takeoff, Jerome reflected on the journey that had transformed personal humiliation into industry-wide reform. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Angela Davis. "Jerome, the congressional hearing on transportation discrimination is scheduled for next month. Your testimony about corporate accountability will help shape federal policy for years to come. The hearing would mark another milestone in the broader transformation." Jerome's experience had attracted attention from federal lawmakers who were developing comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation for the transportation industry. What had begun as one passenger's demand for justice was becoming national policy. "Mr. Hamilton," said the passenger in 2A, a young black woman who appeared to be traveling for business, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I fly twice a week for work, and the difference in how I'm treated now is remarkable. I feel like I belong in first class for the first time in my career." Similar conversations had become routine for Jerome. Passengers regularly approached him to share their own stories of discrimination and express gratitude for changes that made air travel more dignified for everyone. Each interaction reinforced his conviction that corporate accountability could drive social progress when implemented with strategic precision and moral clarity. As Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, Elena Rodriguez stopped by Jerome's seat for a conversation that had become symbolic of the broader transformation. "Mr. Hamilton, I wanted to update you on our latest impact data. Skyline Airways passenger advocacy systems have now been adopted by 14 major airlines. Over 73,000 airline employees have received dignity-based service training, and passenger discrimination complaints industry-wide have dropped 48% in the past quarter. Elena, you've proven that courage can create change even in the most entrenched corporate cultures. Your documentation of that Friday night incident didn't just expose discrimination. It created accountability systems that protect millions of passengers." Elena smiled, her confidence reflecting the empowerment that came from transforming a moment of moral courage into lasting institutional change. "Mr. Hamilton, what you taught all of us is that dignity isn't something you can compromise on. When someone treats you like you don't belong, the response isn't anger, it's accountability." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received word that Skyline Airways has been awarded the National Transportation Equality Award by the Department of Transportation for our passenger advocacy programs. This recognition belongs to every employee who has embraced our commitment to dignity and respect." The cabin erupted in applause, but Jerome understood that the real victory wasn't an award or recognition. The real victory was that children like his daughter would grow up in a world where discrimination in transportation was not just illegal, but operationally impossible due to accountability systems that made bias visible and unsustainable. As Flight 447 began its descent into JFK Airport, Jerome received a call from David Park with news that encapsulated the full scope of their achievement. Jerome Hamilton Global has been selected as the logistics partner for the United Nations Global Transportation Equity Initiative. They want us to develop passenger advocacy systems for international airlines in 47 countries. The recognition meant that accountability frameworks developed in response to one incident of discrimination would now protect passenger dignity on a global scale. Hamilton Global's business success had become inseparable from their commitment to civil rights and corporate responsibility. After landing, Jerome gathered his belongings and prepared to disembark. As he stood up, the elderly couple in 3C who had witnessed his original humiliation 3 months earlier approached him with tears in their eyes. "Mr. Hamilton," the woman said, "we were on that first flight. We saw what happened to you, and we were ashamed that we didn't speak up. But watching what you've accomplished since then, how you turned that injustice into protection for everyone, it's restored our faith in what's possible when good people refuse to accept discrimination." Jerome shook their hands warmly. "Your witnessing that night mattered more than you know. Change happens when people are willing to acknowledge injustice and support accountability measures that prevent it from recurring." As Jerome Hamilton walked off Flight 447 for the second time, the corridor was lined with Skyline Airways employees who had requested the opportunity to personally thank him. Their applause wasn't just for his business partnership. It was recognition that he had helped them become part of an airline that treated all passengers with genuine respect and dignity. Elena Rodriguez accompanied him to the terminal where news crews were waiting to document the symbolic completion of Jerome's journey from discrimination to transformation. "Mr. Hamilton," called CNN's aviation reporter, "what do you hope people remember about this experience?" Jerome paused, thoughtfully looking back at the aircraft that had carried him through a journey of accountability and redemption. "I hope they remember that when someone treats you like you don't belong, you have two choices. Accept it quietly, or use your power, whatever power you have, to ensure it never happens to anyone else. Dignity isn't negotiable. Justice isn't optional. And change is always possible when people refuse to tolerate discrimination." He stepped into the waiting car, leaving behind a legacy that would protect passenger dignity for generations to come. Jerome Hamilton hadn't just reclaimed his seat. He had redefined what it meant to belong in the American sky. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere you had every right to be, remember Jerome Hamilton's story. Change happens when good people refuse to accept discrimination and use their influence, whatever influence they have, to create accountability systems that protect everyone's dignity. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back in anger, but from standing firm in principle and demanding the respect that every human being deserves.